The first thing I noticed was the sunlight, way too much of it, pouring across the pasture where there had been shade for 60 years. The second was my brother Eli staring through the windshield like somebody had erased part of the world while we were gone. The third was a line of 28 fresh stumps along my mother's farm. My name is Daniel Mercer, and before that weekend, I had spent 31 years as a municipal arborist outside Eugene, Oregon, climbing dangerous trees and learning not to trust anyone holding a clipboard near a property line. My mother, Ruth, bought 40 acres near Alder Lake in 1964, when the land was mostly mud, logging scars, and old stumps. She planted hundreds of firs and cedars herself, and by the time Eli and I were grown, those trees had become a green wall between our pasture and a gated neighborhood called Silver Crest. Eli has Down syndrome, and he named those trees the way other kids named dogs. The tallest cedar was Big Henry. A crooked maple near the creek was Aunt June. The 3 firs beside the barn were the brothers. So when Eli climbed out of my truck, walked to the nearest stump, and laid both hands on it, I knew there was no lie kind enough to tell him. He looked at me and asked, "Where did everybody go?" I told him I did not know, even though I already had a pretty good idea. Up the hill lived Cynthia Harrow, president of the Silver Crest Homeowners Association. Cynthia had been writing me letters for nearly 2 years, first asking me to trim the trees, then demanding I top them. Then claiming her house came with an old view easement crossing my land. It did not. I had checked the deed twice. Cynthia did not own my trees, my pasture, or the morning sun. What she did own was a large house facing the lake, and from her kitchen, my mother's firs blocked what she called her premium water view. I called the sheriff, then walked the property with a flashlight until midnight, counting stumps and taking photographs. 12 trees were registered county heritage trees. Several protected the creek behind our goat pasture, and everyone had been healthy when I left for a forestry workshop 48 hours earlier. The next morning, I drove to Cynthia's house. She was loading a tennis bag into a silver SUV when she saw me, and instead of looking nervous, she smiled. "Daniel," she said, "we finally solved the view problem." I stopped 6 feet from her and asked, "Did you hire a crew to cut trees on my land?" She sighed like I was wasting her morning. "Those trees were dangerous," she said. "The board acted for the good of the community." Then she shrugged and added, "You should be grateful." I looked at her and asked the one question that made her smile disappear. "Did you pay them in cash?" She recovered fast, told me HOA business was none of my concern, got into her SUV, and drove away. By noon, a deputy was measuring the largest cedar stump, and when she finished, she said, "Mr. Mercer, this is not a landscaping dispute. This could be felony timber trespass." I believed her for exactly 36 hours because by Wednesday morning, the criminal file had vanished from the prosecutor's desk, and that was when I realized Cynthia had not only cut down my mother's trees. She believed she could bury the case too. What Cynthia did not understand was that burying a case and erasing evidence are 2 different things, and trees, even dead ones, leave records. The deputy who measured the stumps called me Wednesday evening and gave me the name of the contractor Cynthia had hired, an outfit called North Ridge Timber, run by Wade Kessler. She said Wade had already been cited for unlicensed work and might be more afraid of losing his business than of protecting Cynthia. I thanked her, then called my attorney, Lena Brooks, who had spent 12 years handling environmental cases for the state before opening an office above a hardware store in Corvallis. Lena came to the farm the next morning with black coffee, a yellow legal pad, and the expression of someone who had found a loose floorboard in a bank vault. She read the deputy's report, my deed, the heritage tree registrations, and the conservation agreement my mother had signed to protect the creek. Then she looked through the window at the empty ridge and said, "Daniel, do not call Cynthia, do not post anything online, and do not accept a dime until I make 3 phone calls." By Friday, Cynthia's lawyer offered me $19,000 in exchange for a full release and a promise never to speak publicly about the HOA. I showed the letter to Eli. He studied the number and asked, "Is that what Big Henry was worth?" I told him no. He handed it back like it smelled bad. That afternoon I declined. Cynthia responded the way people like her often do when money fails. She tried to rewrite the story. The Silvercrest newsletter announced that the HOA had removed diseased trees threatening nearby homes. A real estate appraiser claimed the firs were rotting and likely to fall within 5 years. Lena brought in Dr. Miriam Shaw, a forest pathologist, and Miriam spent Sunday boring samples from every stump. By sunset, she had proved all 28 trees were healthy, most over a century old, and 2 cedars had been standing before Oregon became a state. Then Lena explained what her phone calls had uncovered. My mother's conservation agreement was tied to a state watershed program. The creek fed a protected salmon run, and I'd enrolled the upper acreage in a federal carbon storage contract. Cynthia had not only cut private trees, she had destroyed habitat, removed protected carbon assets, and caused illegally harvested timber to be hauled across county lines. Lena slid a sheet of figures across the table and said, "Her exposure is already north of $400,000, and that is before fraud. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I looked at Eli feeding our goats in a pasture now baking in direct sun and felt tired. Cynthia had treated my mother's work like landscaping, and no agency letter could put those trees back. So Eli and I started planning what would come next. We called a goat rescue near Salem, brought home 6 animals nobody else wanted, and began turning the farm into a therapy refuge for adults with developmental disabilities. Eli named every goat before the trailer door was open. One-eyed Molly became Mayor Molly, a 3-legged pygmy became captain, and a stubborn old wether became senator because, according to Eli, he looked important and did not do much. For the first time since we came home, I heard my brother laugh. Meanwhile, Cynthia kept digging. She filed a complaint claiming our goats contaminated the creek. A state inspector tested the water, cleared us completely, then opened a separate investigation into the destroyed tree buffer. Cynthia sued me over the same view easement that did not exist. One of her husband's friends filed a false lien against my farm for unpaid tree work, even though I had never met him. Lena had her removed within a day, and the county opened a fraud inquiry. Then Wade Kessler showed up at my door Saturday morning, pale, unshaven, and carrying the kind of guilt that makes a man look older. He admitted Cynthia had paid him $14,000 in cash, showed him a forged easement with a fake county seal, and ordered the oldest cedars cut first because they blocked the sunrise from her breakfast room. He gave Lena a recorded statement before noon. 5 agencies were now building files, but Lena still refused to file everything at once. Cynthia believes she is winning, she told me. Pride will make her do something worse. 2 weeks later, at 4:23 in the morning, a hidden trail camera along the creek sent an alert to my phone. The footage showed a white pickup stopping at our property line, 2 men stepping out with pump sprayers, and a license plate registered to Cynthia's husband. The 2 men in the footage walked the length of the creek carrying 5-gallon sprayers, pumping chemicals onto the water, the new saplings, and every patch of ground where Eli and I planned to rebuild the tree line. They were there for 13 minutes, and before sunrise, Lena had the video in the hands of a state investigator, a federal environmental agent, and the county prosecutor who had once called our case a private property disagreement. Water samples confirmed concentrated herbicide at nearly 30 times the recommended residential level. The white pickup belonged to Cynthia's husband, Grant, and one of the men on camera was the same contractor who had filed the false lien against my farm. That was the moment Cynthia's Little View dispute became a federal investigation. The public hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, and by Thursday afternoon, Cynthia finally called me. Her voice had lost the polished confidence she used at HOA meetings. "Daniel," she said, "this has gone too far. We are neighbors. We should sit down like reasonable adults." I listened to the voicemail twice, then forwarded it to Lena without answering. Friday morning, Eli put on khaki pants, a green flannel shirt, and tucked the wooden bird our mother had carved into his shirt pocket. He told me it was for Big Henry. The hearing room was already full when we arrived, reporters in the back, Silvercrest homeowners whispering along the walls, Cynthia seated at the front in a navy suit and pearls as if she were attending a charity luncheon instead of watching her life come apart. One by one, the witnesses spoke. Miriam presented the tree samples proving the firs and cedars had been healthy. The watershed biologist explained how their roots had protected the Salmon Creek. A federal officer displayed the carbon contract and calculated the loss. Then the environmental agent played the trail camera footage. Nobody moved while the 2 men sprayed poison into the water. When the license plate appeared, Cynthia's husband lowered his head. Cynthia kept staring straight ahead until the agent announced that both of them were subjects of an active criminal investigation involving habitat destruction, obstruction, fraud, and the transportation of illegally harvested timber. Her attorney leaned close and whispered something. For the first time since I had met her, Cynthia looked small. Then Lena called me forward. I stood at the microphone with Eli beside me and told the room about my mother, Ruth, planting those trees one at a time with a borrowed shovel, not because she expected anyone to praise her, but because she believed land should be left better than it was found. I looked at Cynthia and said, "You cut 28 trees because they blocked your view of a lake you never owned. We're going to plant 300, open this farm to families who need it, and make sure what you destroyed grows back long after both of us are gone. Ely tugged my sleeve and asked if he could speak. I lowered the microphone. He looked directly at Cynthia and said, "The trees were our friends. I will plant new friends. You can visit them someday, but you have to be kind." The room stayed silent for several seconds. Then someone began clapping, and soon everyone was standing except Cynthia and Grant. 6 weeks later, they were indicted. Grant lost his county position. Cynthia was removed as HOA president, and together they were ordered to pay more than $600,000 in restitution and restoration costs. The house overlooking the lake was sold before the year ended. The following spring, Eli and I planted 312 native trees around the creek. Families began visiting the goat refuge every weekend, and Eli became the official tour guide, though he still introduced Captain the three-legged goat before introducing me. Sometimes, at sunset, I look across that open ridge and still miss the old forest. Justice did not bring those trees back, and part of me still wonders whether Cynthia deserved prison or whether restoration, public shame, and a lifetime of paying for the damage were punishment enough. What do you think? Did the law go too far, or was this exactly what should happen when someone mistakes influence for ownership? Leave your verdict in the comments, share this story with someone who has dealt with an HOA bully, and subscribe, because the next neighbor who crossed a property line learned an even harder lesson.